Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. You have Letitia Huckaby here, and I'm Jeffrey Kozloff. My gallery partner, Bryn Larson, is also here on the call and will be assisted by our gallery assistant, Suzanne Zeller, who will also be helping us with the video. Y'all may want to please keep on mute. If there are questions during the course of the discussion, there's a chat button down at the bottom, and you can submit questions through the chat function. And you could either send it to everyone. Suzanne will monitor the chat and provide the questions at different times during our discussion this evening. And if you wanted to direct the question privately, you could send it to Suzanne, and then she can work your question from there. Let's start off. First of all, again, welcome. Really appreciate you all joining our first Foto Relevance Zoom presentation and having Letitia, who's our current exhibition, joining us. Let me tell you a little bit first about Letitia's background, just to give a quick introduction about her. Letitia has a degree in journalism from the University of Oklahoma, a BFA from the Art Institute of Boston in photography, and her master's is from the University of North Texas in Denton. She is a frequent lecturer and in multiple publications and a teacher. Her work is in a number of collections, including Library of Congress and Southeast Texas Art Museum and Scripps College. And she has work right now at Crystal Bridges and an upcoming museum exhibition, Missouri Museum in Louisiana, coming up. So with that introduction, we're going to spend a few minutes interviewing Letitia and having her talk to us about a few key points. And then we're going to look at particular images that she's produced. And you can actually see the installation behind me in the gallery, part of it at least. So Letitia, first, start off and tell us, where were you born and how growing up related to the art that we are seeing in this exhibition?
So I was born in Augsburg, Germany, and my dad was an Army officer, and we were stationed there. He did 2 tours of duty in Germany, and but my parents are originally from, my father was from Mississippi, and my mom is from Louisiana. And so we often traveled back to Louisiana, Mississippi to visit family, and it's so different from the way I grew up. Him being an officer, I don't know if anybody's familiar with military bases, but everything's regimented. And you actually live on a street with other people of similar rank. And at one point, he was second in command on the base. So my existence on the base is totally different than the Deep South. I think Texas, in some regards, is totally different than Mississippi and Louisiana. And so I sort of developed a romantic relationship with Louisiana and Mississippi. It took on, the smells and the color of it just really excited me. And so my work is very much inspired by that, the culture, the history, my own family roots there, and just this sort of otherworldly thing, I guess.
What drove you towards photography as an art form?
I actually started in dance, and I danced from the age of 3 to 18, and my dad's last duty station was in Oklahoma, and I was fortunate enough to be accepted into the Oklahoma Summer Arts Institute for 2 summers. And it's a statewide, at the time I went, it was a statewide competition, and they select the top 20 in any particular discipline. And then they would bring in these professionals from all over the world to come and teach you, and you would stay on this campus for a couple weeks. And so I went in modern dance, but while I was there, I was exposed to all these other kids doing different things, like orchestra, acting, mime, um, poetry writing, and they have photography. And I had never seen photography as an art form before, just, magazines and commercial type stuff. And so I got really excited about photography there. But when I went to University of Oklahoma, my parents weren't so keen on a career in photography. They didn't see how a person could sort of provide for themselves making art photography. So I chose journalism. To me, and my focus was in advertising when I was in journalism. So that seemed a creative outlet for me that was as close as I could get to photography. And after I graduated, I actually worked for a radio station that had a country side and a classic rock side, and I was their promotions coordinator. And through that job, I was able to take classes at the VOTEC, the vocational school in town, for reduced costs because I worked at the radio station. And I took darkroom and loved it and learned black and white photography. And then Oklahoma Summer Arts Institute invited me back to be their public relations person when their PR person delivered a baby and went on maternity leave. And while I was there, I met this photographer named Christopher James, who is like the foremost authority on alt process in the country, I believe. And so he had this body of work where he had documented this death, I say in quotes, death hotel in India. And he had this image where this man, and it was a place where the poor could come and have a relatively clean place for their loved ones to pass. And so nobody went until they were a couple days away from the end of life. And it was just a simple like cement room with a cement slab for the person to lay on, and one small window at the top of the wall. And they would put a candle beside the person who was laying there, and the family would kind of stand around. And he had this image where this gentleman was taking his last breath, and you could see the smoke from the candle going in one nostril and out the other one and rising very still-like. And something about that image just pierced my heart. And that's when I knew that I wanted to study photography. And I applied to the Art Institute where Christopher James was teaching, and got in and moved to Boston and never looked back.
Wow. That's a wonderful story. Now, and it's a good segue because your work is unusual. And we're going to see some of this in a few minutes, because in this exhibition, a lot of your work, you print on fabrics and you create quilts.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about how you came to using fabrics and how it plays a role in your work.
So I started as a documentary photographer. I really thought I was going to shoot for Magnum and just travel the world and tell all these heart-wrenching stories. Mm-hmm. And I came to Texas and married a painter. And we had a son. And shortly after he was born, my father passed away. And I had never lost anyone that close to me before. And we went back to Mississippi to visit. And somehow with him being gone, everything looked different to me. You know, my parents raised me sort of oblivious and protected from a lot of things that African Americans deal with in this country and around the world. And so I was a spoiled Army brat that didn't know and didn't pay any attention. But when I went back to Mississippi, I noticed that his mother's house was in a neighborhood that was surrounded on three sides by cotton fields. That on this side of the river, it was predominantly African American, and it looked one way. And when you went on the other side of the river, it was a totally different world. And somehow that realization made me want to be able to layer in more information into my work. And so I just started by printing on cotton. The town that my father was from was the fourth largest producer of cotton in the country. There's a big history um, for my ancestors there in that town. It's not a pretty picture, but I like the idea of printing directly onto the cotton. So I started just by that, just printing photographs onto cotton. Sometimes they were images of cotton that I had shot almost like it was a rose, something precious. And then the work just sort of progressed from there.
Well, yes. Well, the work is so timely and so relevant to today. And I think, but there's an added historical dimension in the work because you have various bodies of work or portfolios in this exhibition, but it's unified by telling the story, as you referred to it, used the term Exodusters. So maybe can you relate a little bit of that history to us as it comes forward in this? Because you've also
About
mentioned the
Exodusters,
tradition.
what that means. Yeah, so Exoduster was a term that was given to newly freed slaves and uh, African Americans who were moving out of the deep South into the Dust Bowl, hence the term Exodusters, the Dust Bowl. But there was a lot of freedmen's towns that were set up in Oklahoma and Kansas because of all of this migration. And the idea was they felt that if they moved to these other areas, they would have a better opportunities for owning land and having their own farms and not having to work under someone else. And there was a whole like advertising campaign to sort of lure them in. Some of the ads coming into Kansas would say, plenty of trees, lots of land available. And I don't know if you've ever been to Kansas, but there was a little bit of a stretch. There's not as many trees there as they were making it out to be. So when they got there, a lot of them had to dig homes into the ground. So they had these like cave-like structures that they lived in until they could build up these towns. But in Oklahoma, they had so many freedmen's towns, it almost became a freedmen's state.
Well,
So,
yeah. So, one of the interesting things is that you're a teacher, you're a working artist, you're a mother, you're very close to your extended family. And one of the things that you've mentioned in the past about the work is how you use it as a tool for communication and passage of tradition, something that goes beyond what a normal photograph, as we think of photography, which always captures a moment in time. You're using it a little differently. In a moment, we're going to look at some of your quilts, images of people, images of landscapes. But maybe just take one more minute and talk about the communication aspect of your work.
Yeah, I feel like that the work is my language, which I'm sure a lot of artists do. I feel like that it's the best way for me to communicate how I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. But along with that, through the use of quilting and other traditional forms, I feel like I'm talking to other generations. Like some of the pieces I've had, I actually printed on quilts that my great grandmother made, and it was a great grandmother I never met. And so I printed on something she created with her hands, but by putting my imagery on it, now there's this dialogue between us. And in some of the pieces, maybe my daughter's image appears on it. So you've got this generational conversation. So it could be something as simple as the idea of craft and history and through the generations, or some of the pieces speak to issues that we're still dealing with today that, you know, like the quilt Jenna 7, I don't think it's one of the ones that you're showing, but has to do with lynching. And, it deals with these struggles that just continue to keep coming.
Very good. Well, let's start now. Suzanne, we have a slide deck of the images that we want to go through, a selection of the exhibition, a part of it. Suzanne, would you start the shared screen? And what Letitia, it'd be wonderful is as we go through an image, maybe speak to us about the context and what that image is reflecting for you.
Okay. So this is the gallery.
Yeah. Like your mantra.
So the work started with quilts when while I was in grad school. This piece was actually made while I was a grad student at UNT. And I wanted to, as I said, I started printing on cotton fabric. So all the images was originally white fabric. And then I was photographing family members, and you see cotton stalks. And really this piece was inspired by sort of the murky color of the Mississippi River. And sort of creating a generational piece. Well, there's my grandfather there, my mom's in that piece, my sister, my nephews, me, my husband, and at the time we had one son who was about 1 or 2 years old. He's in there, so it's this family lineage and through the color a tie to where we're from. And I was printing and just stitching. I still thought like a documentary photographer in that I didn't want to break up the images per se. So each image was like a patch. And I would just sew the patches together to create the quilt. I've since become okay with cutting through a face or something like that. So the works have changed, but that piece is pretty good size. I don't remember exactly the length of it, but I want to say it's equivalent to a queen size quilt.
And you had said all hand stitched?
It's all hand stitched. I never learned how to use a sewing machine. I have my grandmother's sewing machine, but it's sculpture in my studio space. So I just started out trying to figure, my goal was how do I get these two pieces of things to stick together? So I would just do whatever it took to get them to stitch together.
And there are multiple generations in this.
Yes, multi-generational, and a lot of, I like the idea of it looks one way from a distance, but then when you get up close, there's things to discover.
Mm-hmm.
So there's other like smaller pieces sewn into it.
Suzanne, can we go to the next one?
This piece, Cotton, Pests, and Diabetes, I did in honor of my father, who I said was from Mississippi. And that's in the center of the quilt, his obituary with my silhouette in front of it. And there's images of cotton field in bloom, and then after it had been, the field had been cleared, which looks very ravaged and abused, the way the fields look when they go in and clean it. And my father passed away from complications due to diabetes, which is a huge issue in the African American community. And so in this piece, I was sort of making a comparison between the way diabetes ravages the body and the way the cotton field look when they go in and clear it out. And so all of the sort of pink mauve colors that you see in there are actually microscopic images of tissue that's been affected by diabetes. And there's also little, what are they called? The little beetles that attack the cotton fields. There's
Boll
weevil. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's boll weevils stitched into there as larvae and full grown beetles and so forth. So there's a lot of layering about disease.
Yeah, it's very much related to heritage and the earth. And I think there's one more quilt in the series we're showing. This one is lovely. This one happens to be right behind me, and it's very large. It's full wall size. But tell us about this.
So this is a part of a body of work. That the body of work was called Bayou Baroque, and this piece was called Bayou Baroque. And this image was taken on Highway LA 19, going towards my grandmother's house. And when I was a child, you know, you don't know directions and what street and all that kind of stuff when you're going somewhere, but there's certain markers that stick out to you when you're on your way to your grandmother's house. And this field used to be full of goats. And it's one of the places that I would look for to know we're getting close to grandma's house, you know? And I mean, it must have been over 100, maybe more goats all out in this field. And by the time I took this picture, there was one goat left. And if you went by there today, the landscape has reclaimed the fields. You couldn't even see its dense forest and brush trying to look in there. But I was doing this project about nuns, and I've actually always included some sort of natural imagery in my work, whether the project was about my family or in this case about nuns in New Orleans, an order of African American nuns. Somehow, for me, the tie to the landscape speaks volumes about faith and community and heritage. And when I looked at this image, I saw something very spiritual that for me tied in well with the work on the nuns.
Yeah. Now, one thing that people can't tell by looking at the image here is it's made up of multiple segments of the image that were sewn together. I don't know if you recall how many segments it has.
I think it's about 20, maybe.
A large
Maybe.
number,
Yeah.
but
So
it's
it's
all
patched
hand
together.
sewn together to create this beautifully large image here.
Yeah.
Yes, it's exquisite. Suzanne, we can go to the people. Talk to us about people here and what they mean to you and how you're reflecting them, because you show them different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is the title piece for your show, Beautiful
Yep.
Blackness.
Blackness. Yes.
And it's actually my daughter, Hallie, our second child. But I really love the work of Kara Walker, but I'm not as, I'm a little softer than she is, I think, in my approach. But I've started photographing family members behind sheets and quilt tops and different things with a light on them that would project their image on the sheet, and then I'm photographing on the other side. And for me, it speaks to this whole idea of, as African Americans, you really can't see us unless you see the history or the cotton in our background and the light, because faith is such an important part of who we are. And so in order for these images to be captured, you need that surface of cotton that the image is being projected on, and you need the light, which speaks to my faith as a Christian. And all of that comes together to create something really beautiful if you're willing to look at it.
Yeah, let's go to the next one, Suzanne. A different approach.
Yeah, so this is a quilt top that my great grandmother made, and that's my husband in the background. And it's the same kind of idea, this faith and history coming together in a beautiful way. A lot of the work has to do with what normally people see as unimportant or scraps, or the individuals that are not valued in society, and taking them and hopefully representing this in a way that mirrors old master paintings.
The
And there
images,
be an aesthetic. Yeah.
the images are all very uplifting in how they're presented. They're also in these hoops, these wooden hoops that you use to frame them.
Yeah, I started using those with the body of work right before this one that was called 40 Acres Gumbo Yaya. But, you know, the bulk of this body of work, we're looking at the people now, but the bulk of it has to do with the landscape and this idea of the lack of African American land wealth and our history with the land and how tangled that is. And when a woman makes something in an embroidery hoop, she's making something that she wants to pass down through the family. And so for me, it was quite poetic to see these images framed in an embroidery hoop, especially the landscape pieces. And so I started doing that with the last body of work. And I really enjoyed the simplicity of it, and that tie to me is really strong.
It makes your work very unique. Let's go to the next one, Suzanne. Good.
And this is Hallie again, our second child. She's one of my best models. But the same idea of photographing her with the sheet and the light that tied to the history and cotton and our faith.
I think there's such beautiful motion in this image. Let's go to the next one too.
And that's our son.
Mm-hmm.
He's the oldest. And this one, he's sitting in front of the quilt top, but in such heavy shadow that you have to really work to kind of make out his features and see him. The star is sort of what's in the background, and raising a young Black boy in this time, he's sort of cloaked in all of his ancestry and the history and all that weight of stuff that if you're looking at all of that, you miss what's most beautiful right there in front of you.
Yes. And so our guests also know that on the Foto Relevance website, there's a commentary that we had written about your work. And this is one of the featured images that were selected to be in that commentary and talking about your work also. So that's available after this for people to go reference if they wish. Let's go to the next one too. Yeah, this is very different because of the background in particular again.
Yeah. It's a bed sheet that I photographed him behind. And this sort of process started with a body of work that I called Flower. My mom grew up, as I mentioned, in Louisiana, and she grew up on a dairy farm. And the only thing that they bought from the store was their flour. Everything else, they killed it, they grew it, they made it. Soap, everything. And her mom would take the flour sacks. Some of you are probably way too young to even know about this, but maybe some of the older individuals watching can remember hearing stories of this or know about it. But they would take the flour sacks and make clothing out of them for the kids. And that just blew my mind. And so I went looking and actually found a guy who clears out old warehouses and found defective sacks that had not been sewn up properly, or there was something wrong with them while they couldn't use them. So they got boxed up and kind of put to the side. And so he cleared out warehouses, he started selling them. And I bought a big stack of them and printed images on them. But when I wanted to make larger pieces, because they only came in so many sizes, when I wanted to make larger pieces, I started going to thrift stores and finding bed sheets that the patterns remind me of what I was seeing in the flour sacks. And then I would hang those up and have the person sit behind it with the light and let their shadow fall on that and photograph that. So this complete image is the photograph of my brother-in-law actually sitting behind a very dark bed sheet with this floral pattern on it. Okay. And for me, I just love the creativity of, just taking everything and not letting anything go to waste. And I see that a lot in my people, that they often take scraps and make something beautiful, even if it's scrap meat. It's just, they can make something wonderful out of it.
But there's also a very uplifting kind of spiritual look here in this image.
Yeah, and I named it called Delineation. He's a deacon at his church, and it's very important to him, his faith, and delineation, a whole thing about this representation of him. But what's most important is that he's been called, or he feels he's been called.
Yeah. Let's go to the next one. Okay.
Okay, so this image came from a project that was specifically about my family. And it was for the most part, just documentary work, but the work was printed on fabric and then framed in uh, sort of random frames, mismatched frames. I wanted to really speak to that old master aesthetic with the big chunky frames and all that kind of stuff. And there was a lady who owned a frame shop that was going out of business and left some things on the side of the road. And Cedric brought all these frames home. And so I used those. But I just spent a couple years probably just hanging out and taking pictures and putting this body together. And at this time, my great aunt had passed away, my grandmother's sister. And this is the procession out to the gravesite to lay her to rest.
What is so remarkable in the exhibition, to me at least, is that you deal with a life cycle, because you've got the portraits of people, you've got the allusion to, reference to landscape and regeneration in life, and in this case, death. But now let's talk about your landscape work. I think landscapes are next as we advance, and we start, yes, with landscapes here.
Yeah, this one is from the same series we just looked at. So it's a nice transition, but this is my grandmother's house that we used to go and visit her in. And my family lived in sort of I don't want to call it a compound, but like a cul-de-sac where all the houses in a particular area were related to me. So there was always aunts and cousins and uncles and all of that, and grandparents. My great grandmother lived right across the yard from this house. But this was the goal when we were going into Louisiana, was to make it to this house. And it was a very special place for me with a lot of wonderful memories. And at the time that I was working on this project, what I was able to go and sit in with the G's bed quilters and learn about the history of quilting patterns and how that related to my African American culture. And so the technique that I'm using in stitching, which is hard to see, but you can kind of see the little white stitch marks that are sort of radiating, is called a housetop quilting pattern. And the idea is it's supposed to look like if you were looking at the rooftop of a house, what that pattern might look like if you were drawing it out, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I chose to use that pattern for my grandmother's house, and shooting at that time of day that photographers really like, where the sun's going down and you get those warm colors. And then also patching in a number of heirloom fabrics. I like to use fabrics that I have a history to. So a lot of stuff I collected from my grandmother, they would just pop back up in some of these pieces. So I was literally not only quilting the image, but patching in fabrics that I felt worked well with the piece.
Yeah, there's a wonderful surface texture to this piece. Let's move on to another landscape. Ah, yes.
So this is part of the series right before your exhibition. So this is from 40 Acres Gumbo Yaya, which was a project where I was looking at the lack of African American land wealth, and also talking about that promise by General Sherman of 40 acres and a mule to African Americans that some people got and some people had taken away from them, and then the whole thing got canceled. But I was photographing areas in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas where I have connection, and looking at either places where my family had land, where they were slaves, or land that had a strong connection with current African American culture. And so this image, Dixon Correctional Institute, is a prison. And the prison has a farm and an orchard, a pecan orchard, much like what you're seeing behind me right now, except when you drive by, you see inmates out there working in the fields. And if you didn't know what year it was, you would think you were looking at a plantation. to see the inmates out there working. And so I took this image. My mom was in the car with me, and she's not used to me. I did not get permission to take picture at the Dixon Correctional Institute. I just stopped the car, got out, and the cows all cooperated. So there you have it.
Yeah, great moment.
My mom had a heart attack. She thought I was going to end up in Dixon Correctional Institute.
Oh no. Let's go to the next one then too. Yes. Now here, and again, you notice that sometimes you have a singular image, sometimes you'll have like this, like Beautiful Blackness, you'll have three pieces, both in landscapes and some of the images of the people. Maybe you can comment on that too, as well as what Southern Song is about.
This one I took when I was in Kansas. I did a residency there, so I was able to travel around and visit as many freedmen towns, whatever was left. I was able to go by and visit them. And I sort of let the journey be my own personal exodus, because if you've ever driven around Kansas, you don't get anywhere in an hour. Every trip was like 3 hours this way and back, 3 hours that way and back. So I visited all these freedmen towns, and then along the way, I would stop and take pictures. And so all the plains are so beautiful. And I was looking for a sort of blackness in the landscape, whether it was a historical tie to the landscape, or was it something that was aesthetically Black about the image? Or was it that you, as the viewer, knowing I'm taking the image, it causes something in you, right? So if you see me photographing a cotton field, that takes you somewhere, right, in the history.
Yes.
Or if it's a field of like burnt plains, when they've gone in and burned the plains to rejuvenate the plant life, that sort of thing. It's something that normally you wouldn't think was attractive or interesting to look at. You'd rather see green plains, but there's something beautiful about that Blackness as well. And really talking about how oftentimes with Black people, the world doesn't often see the beauty that's there. They see what the media portrays or what the news is saying. They sensationalize the negative and don't see all the beauty that's there. So this one was taken in the evening with the fireflies, and that's what that yellow is in the top section. And I just love the poetry of separating out the image, and it has a sort of spirit about it because of the blur from the breeze. I was on a tripod, so it was a long exposure, and the wind's blowing, and it's just something poetically quiet and beauty and searching and all of that. And the titles for the work that is in Beautiful Blackness, a lot of it came from this book called Black Nature that is a compilation of African American nature poetry. So it's something that I've been reading, and there are certain phrases and things that stuck out to me that some of this is poets who wrote when they were slaves, all the way up to contemporary times. It's like 400 years of African American poetry that deals specifically with nature. And so it really spoke to me in that it's the same things I'm dealing with in my work. So Southern Song is one of the poems from this book.
What a great reference. What a great reference. Let's go to the next one too.
Yeah. This one I took at, here, this is a Texas image, and I took that at Laity Lodge, which is a retreat for Christians outside of San Antonio. And it's just a really beautiful place, and the way the light came through the tree on this one just reminded me of the creation story. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and it was good. And so I just love how the light came into the lens, and it caused that like rainbow effect at the bottom of the piece. And I've always felt closer to God when I was in nature. And it's pieces like that that I like to meditate on and really speak to my faith and my relationship with Him.
And I think your images do convey a sense of relaxation and meditation. They're very reflective. Yes. What's the next one, Suzanne? Oh, here we go.
Harvest Song is another one of the poems from the book. This is in Kansas, and it's part of my journeys going across the plains. And it was on the outskirts of Dunlap, which was a freedman's town there. And the only thing left of that freedman's town was the cemetery. Everything else was gone. And so when I was photographing in that area, I just started taking pictures and thinking about, that lack of African American land wealth, and how many had dreams of having their own farms, and it was never realized, or they had to sell it for less than what it was worth, or whatever happened, that it's sort of a lamenting, if you will, for what could have been.
Okay.
And framed in that embroidery hoop.
Yeah.
Just a raw embroidery hoop. Mm-hmm.
Next one, Suzanne? Yeah. Oh, now we have more goats, though.
Yeah. And this image was actually taken in St. Paul, Minnesota, which everybody knows what's going on in Minnesota right now has sparked all over the world.
Yes.
But this was taken on the campus of Bethel University when Cedric and I were keynote speakers for the Christians in Visual Arts conference there. But, I was taking it thinking about the landscape, but now this piece actually has a lot more power to me. It's called Those of Our Land, and thinking about, the innocent, and all the reference to the lamb in the Bible, and the sheep, and the importance of the one that got lost, and all this kind of stuff goes through my mind when I look at it now and thinking about what's going on politically in our country, and this sort of tussle with the rights of African Americans, and whether they're looked at as just those of our land or the other.
Yes. A beautiful image.
And this is a study for a larger piece called What the Land Remembers. And this was taken at a freedman's town in southern Louisiana. The name is slipping me right now of the town. But there's a number of houses still left, but a lot of this property is being sold to, like, industry has come in, all these chemical plants and that sort of thing has come into the area, and they've started buying up the land. But the way they're doing it is when they offer the landowners the ability to sell their property, they say, if you're going to sell us anything, you have to sell it all. So some of these families actually are descendants of individuals who received their 40 acres. But if they hit hard times and they need to sell some land, the companies are saying, you can't just sell us 5 acres, you've got to sell us the whole 40-acre parcel. So when you drive through the town, and it was a town with a lot of wonderful history. They had a beautiful school built there, a community center, all this businesses, just, beautiful, right on the southern part of Louisiana. And now when you go through, there's all these fences, no trespassing. There's a few homes there, or the slabs are exposed where the house used to be. And this was one of the homes where it was abandoned. And I just, with the way the land is being taken, I like seeing all that plastic as a barrier between the history of that house and all the lushness of the landscape around it. And it's being overtaken by companies that are not only taking all of the land, but causing a lot of health issues in that community because of the chemicals that they're putting into the air and into the water and things like that. So what the land remembers, that's the study for that piece.
And that sense of loss that comes with it.
Yeah.
So that was it. That's a wonderful, thank you, Letitia. You know, looking at the work and hearing you speak about it, very much get a feel for you as an artist, a person, your beliefs, and it really does come through in the work. So thank you for spending that time talking to us about that. Let me ask, were there questions, Suzanne? Or does anyone have questions now in the next few minutes?
Hello. We did have a couple questions,
Okay.
but we are still taking more at the moment, of course.
Right.
Firstly, Letitia, can you reveal what you are working on next? Are you going to continue working on fabric and with embroidery hoops, or are we going to see a different development?
Well, with coronavirus,
Yeah.
some things have been postponed, but the project that there's two projects that I was planning to work on. I'm still trying to figure out how to get these projects done this summer. The first was one that started over a year ago where I was giving female artists of color protest signs. And I would ask them to create a sign based on their idea of the word suffrage. And suffrage has two tracks. It has to deal with women's rights, and it also it means a series of petitions or prayers. And so I didn't tell the women which way to go with their sign. I would just give them a blank sign and say, here, make what you want to talk about. And then when they were done, they would come to one of our studio spaces, which is at my husband's grandmother's house. And I would photograph them in front of a white seamless holding up their sign. And it would be my first time seeing the sign. And then those images would get printed onto vintage, either flour sacks, feed sacks. Some of them I had those, the sacks that they picked the cotton with and they would drag through the field. A really long ones. Some of them are like nine feet long. And so that's a project that I was supposed to be working on right now, but since we're social distancing, I've stopped photographing the women. And then the other thing that I've been trying to get to is there is a phenomenon that happens in Mobile Bay, Alabama, and in the summer, and it happens one other place. It happens in Japan, in a bay there, and they call it Jubilee in Alabama. But in the summer months, and especially in August, the oxygen levels in the bay drop right before sunrise, and a lot of sea life beaches themselves. And the people will go along the beach ringing bells saying, Jubilee, Jubilee, and they will bring their coolers and their truck beds and fill it up with seafood and freeze it for the year. It's like free food, right? And so I'm interested in that just because of the connection between Jubilee and the Bible and this idea of stewardship that we're supposed to have with the land and provision for God. There's a lot of stuff working in that for me. But along with that, there's a town that's a freedman's town that is home to the descendants of the last slaves that came over on a slave ship. And so all of that kind of works with stuff that I'm thinking about. And I'm still trying to figure out if I can make that trip happen. I had applied for some grants to go there and everything got pushed off because of Corona, but we'll see. Might have to just go in my own pockets and go stay in Mobile Bay for a month.
There's another question, Suzanne. I can't wait to see those two projects though.
Me too.
I know this coronavirus has really upset a lot of hearts, so to speak, But
yes, our next question is, where will we see your work next? Will you be showing at Crystal Bridges? Do you have anything upcoming that we should know about?
So Crystal Bridges still has the work up for State of the Art, and they are in the process of deciding if they can extend that show longer. And then it's also scheduled to travel. When you're in that exhibition, they travel it for a couple years. They haven't released the locations where that work's going to go yet, but they have it for, I believe, 2 or 3 years. So it'll be traveling around the country for that. And then, as Jeffrey mentioned at the beginning, the Mason Museum in Louisiana, the show was supposed to open this summer. They shifted it to next summer. So, and the focus there will be on the pieces that deal with nature. So a mix of stuff from different bodies of work, but specific to the landscape. So there's that work. And then I was just in talks with museum in Lafayette, and the name is slipping me. He's going to kill me. But that show potentially will open in October of this fall and go through the summer of next year. And of course, Jeffrey will have work still there at Foto Relevance, and the gallery in Dallas, Liliana Block, is going to be showing works as well for group shows and things like that.
Yeah, so we'll have work still available in the gallery. Thank you.
All right, we have another question.
Uh-huh.
There is so much history in your work. How did your children react to the work and its history? And what was it like to collaborate with them on this project?
They, I don't know if it's because they've grown up in it. You know, my husband's a painter, and his work deals a lot with a lot of the same things. You know, he's looking at history and culture and faith just through a different lens. And so they often end up sitting for his paintings or being photographed by me, and sort of in and out of galleries since they were born, in museums. And so I don't know if they think about it as deeply. My oldest daughter realizes that I use her a lot in the work, so she sees herself as a bit of a celebrity sometimes. She likes to see the pieces when they pop up in the newspaper or the magazine or something like that. Or she wants a cut if one of her pieces sells. So there's that. But our son is very artistic. Like, he draws continuously. He's a builder. He's sort of like a tinkerer. So he's always been able to construct things. He's interested in engineering and space now. We had to get a telescope. And the second child was in dance, and she likes horseback riding. And then the youngest one, we don't know, she's all over the place, but they do ask a lot of questions when we're making work, and we do talk to them very plainly about what the work is about and what the work is saying, and it seems to sink in, and they seem to appreciate it. So hopefully, but I don't know.
Well, it obviously fulfills a very important mission that you have with your art, and that is handing down tradition and handing down the stories and handing down the messages.
Yeah.
To your own children as well as to others and the viewers.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So, other questions, Suzanne?
Yes, we have another one. One of our viewers has commented on the medium of quilting as possibly being a metaphor for the African American experience. What is your thought process on that?
I agree with that. And that's what I was trying to reference when I was talking about this idea that we as a people take scraps and make something beautiful out of it. Even, you know, when we were slaves and we got the worst cuts of meat, now they're delicacies. Or, you know, just this George Washington Carver, for example, he spent his whole life creating things out of other stuff, you know, like the peanut. How many things did he make out of the peanut? So for me, the quilting is this idea of taking scraps or what normally would have been thrown away or overlooked and repurposing it and making something beautiful. And then there's that history that's built into that piece as well, because they're using the fabrics that they wore or they used or what have you. So it had a life before, and then it gets recreated and now it's got a new life. And that's really what I see happening with my imagery. You know, I see myself as a photographer. And so I shoot first, not knowing what that piece is going to be. Is it going to be a quilt? Is it going to be a dress? Is it just going to be framed? I don't know how the presentation is going to be until I get that image back into the studio. And then that image has a new life. And I don't create a series of pieces like a lot of photographers do. It's usually one unique piece. And so now that image is set up on a pedestal, so to speak.
All right. It looks like David has his hand up with the little Zoom feature of raising a hand.
Okay.
If you have a question, feel free to unmute and ask it. And if anyone else has any questions, you can send them in the chat.
Does that unmute it?
Yeah, we can hear you, David.
They're beautiful images, and I had a question for you. How do you see how you've replaced in this country our national symbols with personal symbols? Yet the national symbols seem to only talk about themselves, but what's behind them are the symbols that you've created.
I don't know if I understand exactly. Can you repeat or rephrase for me? I'm sorry.
Everything you may replace an American flag with a quilt. It's the personal symbology that's so important to you. That's your world.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how that relates to how you see yourself in the face of the kind of, well, weird nationalism that exists right now.
Well, I think anytime I'm talking about African American history, I'm talking about American history, you know? And that's where I think the real crux comes in, because oftentimes we're seen as this other, but there's a lot here that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for us and our relationship, let's say, with the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? So I don't really see it as separate. I see it as trying to shine a light on something that's been pushed under the rug and ignored. I'll tell you an interesting story. When I was in school in Boston, that was the first time I had someone call me the N-word, when I was in Boston. And it caused me to want to make work about it. And so I took these images, they were self-portraits, and I had the American flag in these self-portraits. And I took the work to school. And at the time, I think I was the only African-American student in my class. And nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted to really talk about what was going on in the images. They were afraid to say anything. And I had this really dear friend named Jenny. As a fiery white girl from the East Coast, and she got hot that nobody would say anything during critique about my work. So the next day, it was her day for critique. She went in the night before and built this huge thing and covered it with a tarp so that nobody could see it. And our critiques were open at the Art Institute. The whole school could come in. People would come in with their drinks and their snacks and sit in the back and watch. So they'd have people come from outside, professionals to come and sit. They were pretty brutal. And so the beginning of her critique, she talked for like 20 minutes about the idea of art and the importance of art and the beauty of understanding what we're doing and And after she got done, everybody wanted to see her piece so bad, and she refused to show it to them. And they literally had temper tantrums in the room. You went to all this great length and the piece looks huge. You got it covered up and now you don't want to, it almost caused a riot. And she refused to show it to them just at the end to say, well, you really didn't want to talk about Letitia's piece yesterday, so what's the point of me showing you mine? And so to me, it is about what's going on in the country. It's just my particular way of presenting it. It's a little softer and it requires a little more digging, I think. I'm not a sort of in-your-face political artist, but I see politics in pretty much everything that I do.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Suzanne, any others?
I believe those are all the questions we have.
All right. Well, let me again thank all of you out there for participating and joining in with us to listen. Let me give a really heartfelt thank you to Letitia.
Oh, thank you.
You've really brightened my Tuesday.
Did I, or did I just
Yeah, just
completely
like your
upset
work.
everybody?
It just, I mean, I feel that
Thank
it was
you.
a very special moment to hear you. And I've talked with you about your work so many times, but hearing about it tonight was, again, very special. So thank you for taking the time. We'll let you go back to the family and hopefully begin those 2 projects you told us about.
Yeah.
And I hope everyone has a good, safe evening, and everybody, our best wishes to hope everybody stays well.
Thanks for everybody tuning in. Everybody who decided to listen to me jabber on. I appreciate it, and all the kind words that are popping up in the chat. I see those, and I thank you for that.
Go enjoy some art, everyone. Thank you, and have a great evening. With that, we'll sign off. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.